What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Hodl My Beer podcast. Super pumped today. So I have Eric Rice on with us. He's the president and founder, Eric, of
Yeah.
Sovereign Capital. Cool. So they're a private equity firm, and they have, obviously they have their hands in the big Bitcoin space a little bit. So we'll talk about that. Obviously, a big week, since the last episode. The strategic Bitcoin reserve got rolled out. We know the details of at least partially what that's going to look like a little bit. There's been a few news as far as Berkshire Hathaway has been floated. They're sitting on $300 billion worth of cash. So, we're going to discuss that a little bit. If there's a chance that the Oracle, Warren Buffett, actually decides to throw that into Bitcoin after his partner had called it rat poisoning. So we'll kind of talk about that. And then, the big thing that I kind of just threw in here, Eric, and maybe we can start here. The European Union just said that they're going to confiscate savings that aren't used in the amount of $10 trillion to be used for whatever the bureaucracy decides it's going to be used for. Have you seen that at all or no?
I have.
Yeah.
I have. I did a podcast on it earlier. It was my fourth podcast today. So
let's go. He's running a firm, making the podcast circuit. So I'm pumped to have him on. I'm sure you've told this story a million times, but obviously there's a different following everywhere you go. How did you get into Bitcoin? Obviously, so for those of you that don't follow Eric, and I'll make sure we plug his Twitter because he's a great follow as well. I would say like freedom maximalist, right? Like stay
100%.
Stay kind of out of my way and let me do my own thing, which is a lot of the ethos of the Bitcoin community. But how did you find it? Was it by accident? Was it through work? Or what's the story look like? Kind of take us on that journey for a few minutes, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, my Bitcoin journey is pretty funny, actually. So I'm a TradFi guy by nature. So I got out of school, I traded, I managed money. I was, I think to date, still the youngest high net worth advisor in Morgan Stanley's history.
Let's go.
And hated it. Absolutely hated it. I love managing money. I was going into the CFA program. I was in the second module and just kind of said, you know what? I'm tired of dealing with little Billy every year on his birthday. I don't even like little Billy. God bless him. He's a good kid, but I'm tired of these birthday parties. And I ended up leaving and moving from Chicago to California. And then I got heavily into technology. So during that time, I launched a bunch of companies, bunch of disasters, entrepreneurial education, I call it. That was my tuition. Is a bunch of failures, a few successes.
Usually how it goes, right? It's never, yeah. So.
Oh yeah. You're like, I can totally run a business. And,
yeah.
Next thing you know, you're my first business. I actually grew from coast to coast in 18 months, from 0 to 40 million in revenue. Wow. But then a law change knocked it out. And then I went into technology because I was using Facebook for marketing in 2009, maybe 2007, 2008, somewhere in that area. And people were like, well, how do you do this? So I started an agency. I got connected with a lot of tech guys, got really into tech. 2010, I had somebody come to my house, a friend of mine. I was living in Los Angeles. And I was in San Diego. He comes to my house and he goes, Eric, you got to get into this Bitcoin thing. And I'm like, what is it? And he explained it to me horribly, right? Because like the pitch for Bitcoin was just terrible when it came out. And I was like, okay, this is really stupid, dude. Like, no thanks. This is dumb. We already have the dollar. What are we going to do? Go through a bunch of businesses. I continue to hear Bitcoin over and over again. 2014, I'm at a tech conference and I was speaking on machine learning in 2014. And the day before, 3 days before, the guy who threw the event, he goes, hey, listen, you can learn things pretty quick. Our Bitcoin guy stepped out. Can you do a presentation on Bitcoin? I go, I don't know anything about it, but I'll study it for 3 days and I'll totally understand it, right?
Yeah.
So I did. I spent like an hour and a half after work every day studying it, put together a presentation. The presentation's still online. It's absolutely horrible. Terrible suit. I was running 102 fever at the time. It was just a terrible presentation. And in the middle of it, I just was kind of like, okay, like here's what I didn't really understand what decentralization was. I don't think really many people did back then.
Yep.
And the final conclusion of the presentation was, it's a cool, attempt by online bros, but it's never going to work.
Yep.
And then I went years, and every year I have a friend, Ken, he's a monster stack. This is a guy who was stacking hundreds at a time in that period. And he kept coming to my house and telling me about it. I'm like, Ken, I don't want to hear this. I have other things to do.
Yeah.
So fast forward all the way to 2020. That was when I was in California running a public company. I saw what was happening in this country. I literally gave back millions in equity. I was running a public company. Moved out to Texas. Started, like you said, I'm a freedom maximalist. I just really believe people coin me a libertarian, but like, how do you do that? Because ask 100 libertarians what a libertarian is,
Yep.
and none of them can describe it. So I'm unaffiliated. And I moved out here, started working with patriot groups and launching, online chats on Telegram and doing all this, stuff to figure out what's happening in the world. And my niche has always been money.
Yep.
So I got in here and I'm like, there's got to be an escape hatch from the system we're in. Like, I've known about the Federal Reserve for 20 years. And, I'd read all the books. I've read, Creature from Jekyll Island and Ron Paul's book, Eustace Mullins' book. If you haven't read Eustace Mullins' book, it's actually better.
That's one I haven't checked out yet, so we'll have to
read anything from Eustace Mullin. If you want to know the truth, Eustace Mullin told the truth no matter what. I mean, fantastic writer. So it's like 2021 and I'm buying gold, right? Like, I'm like, okay, well, if the economy collapses and the communists take over the country, at least I'll have gold. And, I had gone so far as like meeting ranchers in Texas and like, hey, here's a half ounce gold. If the crap hits the fan, then, I'll pay you in gold for meat. And went down that whole route. And my business partner and one of my best friends comes into my house in 2021 and he goes, listen, I need 2 hours of your time. And he's been a Bitcoiner since 2016.
Got it.
And
this is different. This is different from Ken.
Different guy. Yeah, this is
guy.
Michael. This is Michael Wade. This is my business partner.
Nice.
And I go, Michael, I appreciate it, but you know how I work? I have to learn things on my own. Like, I don't go to church to learn about Jesus. I read the Bible. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's how I do it.
Yep.
So after all these people and all these years, I decided, okay, I'll get the Bitcoin standard. Thank God for Bitcoin. I had just met Robert Breedlove, who was Michael's roommate in college, or fraternity brother in college.
No way.
And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, okay, I'm reading, if you read Bitcoin standard, you're like, this is actually a brilliant book on the history of money.
Yep.
And it's very little Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, it's the last 50, 60 pages is Bitcoin.
Yeah. It's next to nothing because the system's actually fairly simple, pure, and beautiful. And now, mind you, like I was a member of a CEO private club in Los Angeles called Metal. And we actually had John McAfee come and speak. He was like, my buddy Ken was his VP candidate for when he ran for president.
Oh, wow.
And when John came in, he was talking to the group and he literally teared up. So like when I see, altcoiners out there going, look at McAfee. Well, McAfee was like a drug addict pedophile who needed money. So of course he's going to pump anything but Bitcoin. But like when I heard him myself speak about Bitcoin, he was weeping. He was like, tearing his eyes. Like, this is the most beautiful code I've ever seen written. And I just ignored it. Yeah. So I spent 1,000 hours reading books, watching podcasts, calling. I know so many Bitcoiners that I was just calling them like a little kid. Like, hey, why does this happen? Why? Yeah. How? What? When? And never cared about the price. Like I figured I had already missed the run, right? Like I was like, well, I've already missed it, but at least I could have some if it's worth it. And 2022, I really got it. I had people, I've been on Telegram for a long time, and every week I was getting something from, you could probably name the 3 names of altcoins that were offering me money to promote their altcoin. And I said, I don't take money for any promotion. I'll promote things I believe in, that I invest in. So late 2022, I just got I was an oil and gas executive at the time. I got a huge bonus. And I was like, at this time, like in my office, I was known as like, if Eric's going to get gold, you can give him some money, he'll pick it up for you. Yeah. So I'm stocking up on gold. Yeah. And I say, you know what? Bitcoin just hit 16.8 this afternoon. So I just swept up a handful of Bitcoins. I just was like, okay. And I'm like, I want one for me, one for my kid, one for my wife, because I fully understood this. At that point, I thought I fully understood the system. And then it started to run, and I just continued to accumulate every month. Now, I had been buying the top 3 coins, for $25 a week for like a year. Yep. And just kind of dabbling. But the only thing that actually caught my attention, I started to realize that there's Bitcoin, which is like a living organism. And then there's these altcoins, which are actually like really good software. Yep. I just don't understand the value of the currency. And I don't think anyone does. The market kind of tells you that story. They're good trading devices, but I was looking for a savings vehicle and an off-ramp from central banking. So for me, my journey was kind of self-induced pain. I should already be long retired from the time that I heard it. I could have bought Bitcoin at like 48 cents. Yep. And so everyone gets it at the price they deserve. So I accumulated really heavy in the high teens, low 20s, and I continue to now today. I still have DCA going every week. And that's kind of my Bitcoin story, but it went so far with it. Once you understand it, you kind of get obsessed. And I was at an oil and gas firm. I was trying to convince the CEO to start, selling captured gas or building a mine on location. And it got to a certain point where Michael and I just decided it's time to leave. And we'll start doing energy arbitrage deals to build high compute units, Bitcoin mines, AI centers. And we have really found a niche in Tennessee. And then we have another few locations we're working on now. But it became such a fascination for me that I dropped a career that literally I was making more money than I had in my entire life, just to be able to pursue this ecosystem. And it's gone so far, Trey, where I just went on solosatoshi.com and I ordered 8 miners, 4 for my house and 4 to give away to friends. So it becomes an obsession when you truly understand that Bitcoin is a militia fighting it, like kind of like the American Revolution, fighting against the well-financed, well-paid English.
Yep.
That you start to realize you go from, I understand it, I'm going to buy a little bit, to like, I'm going to invest in it. And then ultimately I'm going to really learn it. And then I'm going to leave my career and get into it and start mining and start running a node. I run a node at home. I kind of gone the full, and I advise everybody, if you're going to call yourself a Bitcoiner, like a true Bitcoiner, you need to run one of these solo mines. Like the mining sector, I got into it because I started realizing the danger of centralization. So we want to build all off-grid, small, mid-sized market, 1,500, 3,000 miners at a time, the S21 Pros.
Yep.
But that I'm really big on home mining, which earlier today, Trey, somebody hit a block for $300,000.
I have to check so I just got the Solo Satoshi Blockstream Jade. And I was golfing Monday, so I'm in the East Coast, Northeast, and it was like our first 70-degree day, but I'm out on the golf course and, on Twitter for whatever reason, and somebody hits a solo block, and I was just like, in my head playing golf, I'm like, dude, I wonder if that was me. Like, I can't wait. I told my buddy, he knows nothing about, Bitcoin other than what I tell him. I'm like, dude, there's a 1 in a million chance that I get home and I mined 3 full, 3.125 Bitcoin. But alas, not my time yet to do all that. No, so that's really interesting. I love obviously the point of you get the Bitcoin at the price you deserve, but I also like that, when you're kind of going through your story, there was never any bitterness about it. You know what I mean? About,
No.
Not getting it. But I feel like that's a lot of people, especially new people that are potentially listening to this show. Like that's a trap that you can easily fall into. And briefly, my story, my cousin was in Bitcoin in 2013. He was working at a company called Honey Badger, who doesn't exist anymore. In 2016, 2017, when the block size war was going on, he was in the big blocker camp. So like, that was all I knew. So I didn't have a ton of money at that point, but whatever extra savings I had went into Bitcoin Cash because I didn't study it for myself. And then 2021, 2022 came around. I collateralized Bitcoin on Nexo wallet, got completely wiped of my whole stack. So, same, but different, as far as kind of, having to put your head on the grindstone and just get it wherever you, at the price you deserve, essentially.
I had a contract. I make good presentations, and in like 18 or I don't know, maybe 2016, when Bitcoin was like 1,000, I did a $5,000 gig, and a guy handed me a cold wallet with 5 Bitcoin in it. I still have no idea where that is. I was like, okay, I basically just worked for free, right? Like, it's not the dollar, so it couldn't be good. No bitterness at all. I mean, I could have literally bought half of FN vodka. I just didn't have the money to do it. I was there to buy half of it. I had Twitter Series A, deck on my desk, and I thought that was stupid. So, as an investor and an entrepreneur, you just have to realize that sometimes you're going to miss a boat. Sometimes you're going to get on a boat. You're going to miss more than you get on. And, eventually you will find a space that makes sense. And when you really understand Bitcoin, you start to understand that it actually doesn't matter what price you have it at. I'm not a number go up guy. I certainly love the fact that I've 4x'd my money in 2 years, and that's fantastic. That didn't mean anything to me. For me, it was more like the lack of censorship, unconfiscatable, the most impenetrable force on planet Earth from a digital perspective. So the safety, the sovereignty was always important. I looked at it as a savings account, and I told my wife when we started getting into Bitcoin, I said, listen, if we do 10% a year, that's better than a checking account or savings account. It's way better. It's better than we're going to do in the stock market on an average year, better than bonds. And more importantly, it's totally liquid, totally portable. And we just kind of went on that path. I was on a space earlier today, and a guy was talking about how difficult it is when your wife isn't a Bitcoiner. Mine wasn't either. She trusts me with money, and that's what I've always done. But she now gets on Instagram and trolls, altcoiners. I don't use the other term. But she trolls them when people are like, buy this altcoin, and she's like, don't waste your time, just buy Bitcoin. Like, my wife's become a full Bitcoiner, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome to see. So was there a moment when so obviously your buddies come to you multiple times. Was there like an aha moment for you? Was it when you read the Bitcoin Standard, or like, I always try to pinpoint that moment for me.
No, for me, it was understanding hash rate like that. And I don't even check, I check the hash rate more than I check the price, not just because we're in mining, but for me, that was the most fascinating thing when I understood how mining works, what the purpose of mining is, and how everyone can do it. For me, that was kind of like, well, we just became the bankers, right? Like, if you're not mining, you're just you have an account at the bank, but I want to be the banker too.
Yep.
So really understanding hash rate and the cybersecurity, which I've been in the past, understanding how difficult it would actually be to crack that code and how simple it would be to crack a proof of stake network, which is fascinating to me. That some things stick out, right? The things that really pushed me over the edge, to be honest with you. So the hash rate was fascinating, and the narrative. So I've been a big narrative guy. I'm a big kind of like, I noticed psyops pretty early on. I'm a conspiracy theorist, whatever you want to call me anymore.
So you're right most of the time.
Yeah, more than I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Thankfully, knock on wood. But seeing the narrative, right? So I would see central bankers hate it, Democrats hate it, most Republicans hate it because they're basically just Democrats. I don't trust anything in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And then I started seeing, really like the ECB, the way they just talk down on it, and watching all the analysts and then researching the analyst and going, oh, well, this guy's clearly financed by the Fed, or you could see like this major opposition. I noticed that there was like a very similar psyop on Bitcoin to Trump. Yeah, it was almost the exact same psyop. So Orange Man bad, Orange Coin bad. That's really what drew my attention to it at that time. If it wasn't for noticing, like you can watch, there's a couple altcoins that, their entire marketing model is, Bitcoin's corrupt, it's stupid, no one should use it, it's never good, it has no utility.
Yeah, that's their model until their altcoins are dropping, and then they're like, hey, we're a community, we need to stick together. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Know what I mean? So,
exactly. Yeah. So it was the narrative that got me, and then the hash rate that locked me in.
Yeah, I mean, the hash rate's fascinating. I openly say, on the podcast, like, I don't, the tech part of it was something that came very late for me. Like, it was more so the history of money, and like, if we don't do this, what the hell else are we gonna do? To opt out of the system. So I think that was kind of what drew me to it. So you said you're rightfully a skeptic of DC. What was your opinion on the strategic Bitcoin reserve? What is your opinion on it? And I know time's going to tell for a lot of this, but I guess first thoughts.
Well, I have a few. So first of all, nothing in politics is really a point A to point B. I think it's important for people to understand. They have a process. They are narrative creators. All of our politicians, all of them work for the Federal Reserve. That's, in a fiat system, those closest to the money printer, which would be corporations and lobbyists, they're the ones who influence politics. And then politicians basically become a salesman for new money printing. Like, hey guys, we need to do this stuff. Yeah, it's going to cost you your kids their financial freedom, but we need to do it now or the world's going to end. And when you realize that, my thoughts on the strategic Bitcoin reserve, number one, I was in Nashville right when Trump spoke. So I was 12 rows up right in center. Yep. And I had met so many good people there, and it was such a good vibe. But when I left there and I said, who is Cynthia Lummis? Never heard of her before. I'm heavily into understanding politics. Never heard of her. Great way for her to build a name. I talk to politicians pretty frequently, and a lot of them will call me and say, hey, I'm looking for donations. Do you know a crypto company? So like, I can tell you point blank, I know how much money is being thrown around Washington, D.C. to make crypto as credible as Bitcoin. Like, it's a really big onslaught, and it's all political. But the strategic Bitcoin reserve, I think, is a couple different things. So, and I don't know what it is. So you could look at it from one perspective, which is kind of the optimist perspective, and say, well, this is capitulation. And they're finally saying this is a good thing and we should own it. That's valid. You could look at it from another perspective and say, well, we like, even when I got into Bitcoin, before Saylor started saying this, you could ask my business partner. I came to him and I said, Michael, this is never going to be peer-to-peer cash. I know I think that the peer-to-peer idea was either like a legacy plan or a psyop to distract you, because no government's going to go like break down, oh, you're going to compete with the dollar, right?
Yep.
So a good way to hide yourself as you become the store of value. Or it's a treasury asset. Like I said that 2 years ago, right? I go, listen, what we should do is actually use this as a base layer and make the dollar layer too. Like that would actually be the proper use for Bitcoin. So you could look at it from that way. Maybe they're accumulating for that to happen at some stage. Perhaps they'll nationalize strategy and take over Bitcoin's Saylor's entire stash. Another way to look at it, which is probably the pessimistic way to look at it, but psyops are psyops, is that the government would want to acquire, if I were an evil overlord, and you can use AI for this, type in, if I was an evil overlord, how would I conquer Bitcoin? And first thing I would do is I would laugh at it. I would say it's silly. We've been through that. I would call it damaging to the environment, uses too much electricity, illicit activities, drug running, child trafficking. I would just blame everything on it. If that didn't work, then what I would do is start buying it so no one could use it. So while everyone's really excited, I don't really pick a stance on anything. I'm pretty much middle of the fence until I know what I know. So it's one of those three things, I think. But I think the most important thing is it doesn't matter if any three of those possibilities are real. All three of them speak to the credibility and the danger it poses to the actual system itself. Because in my opinion, I just met with some of the Lightning Lab guys in Austin, Texas, and we're probably a year away from maybe being they're probably a year away from being maybe the largest payment system in the world. And Wow. They're working on taking stable coins, other currencies for the network, which will all settle in Bitcoin. So, I look at it from the perspective of like, from the danger zone area, if I were the government, I'd want to acquire a few million so that I would have them so that you don't have to use it, that you can actually use the dollar, which is Gresham's law. But from that perspective as well, Bitcoin is about a year and a half away from actually achieving the peer-to-peer transactional layer, which Hal Finney wrote about in 2010. He said, we're going to need Bitcoin banks and a layer 2 payment system. So they knew it from the beginning. We're at that stage, which would make it very dangerous, which is why a government would want to acquire it. But I choose to believe in my mind that it's more of a kind of a salute to, Trump said something very valuable. He said, Bitcoin by itself is an achievement of human cooperation. So it could kind of just be a salute to the pleb army out there that's been building this network from the ground up. Bitcoin, people don't realize, if you read the Satoshi emails from Craig Wright, that lawsuit, there was a total of $6,800 donated to build Bitcoin. It was built for $6,800, and it's now worth 1.8 trillion.
Yep.
So you kind of got to tip your cap to that at one point and give it credibility on the grand stage. But I also see it being like the life raft in between systems. So I think what could happen with Bitcoin with the reserve is you trash the old system, it inflates Bitcoin massively. You come out with a new currency and it'll deflate it massively, but it'll never kill it. So, there's different ways to look at the SBR. And since it's just an executive order, that's really what I do, is just kind of look at what options it could be. And I don't see any of them being negative in the short term for Bitcoin. But I certainly have concerns, as any freedom maximalist would have, that them owning too much of it. Of course, it won't influence the system, but it'll keep it out of the hands of your friends who haven't bought any.
Yeah.
So there's good and bad in all of it.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to lean towards the, pumping the brakes mentality and seeing what comes of it. And the way that I like to look at it is, you can be optimistic. Having some issues with the camera here. I
gotta get you one of these lights for your house, man.
I know. I'm in the dungeon here. No, I think you can be optimistic, but I think you can also be vigilant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's the best place to position this is, right now it seems like very, very good news, but if things change, the community has to do what the community's always done, which is call out the BS,
Yeah.
And so that's personally the way that I look at it.
Bitcoiners are the only ones that do that. Like you can look at any altcoin community and they will defend their position and their people to no end and bash competition. Whereas Bitcoiners are the only tribe in crypto that actually attacks each other to try to get to the truth. And that's also an attractive thing to me, to the community, because it's constantly seeking truth.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we're seeing that the reason obviously is because the other cryptocurrencies are so fragile in nature. It's the ethos isn't there. And this is what kind of, I think, sparked everything for me when I really dove into it, was that the ethos with Bitcoin is that people buy to hold, to not sell. And the ethos in the altcoin community is to rug pull. I mean, you don't want to be the last. You don't want to be the last one holding the bag, and that's, I guess that kind of brings us to the next point here, which is altcoin season, so to speak, which you've seen every year, right? Bitcoin pumps and then the alts follow. My biggest thesis with this is that there's so much smart, quote unquote smart, right? But smart, big capital flowing into this space. Like, plebs don't move the market anymore. And so the reason even 4 years ago, the market was still premature enough where you could have people that could move the space with, their influence on Twitter or their influence on Telegram or whatever it is. And you'll still have that from case to case. But the combination of the fact that like who is buying altcoins on Wall Street? Which national, whether it's sovereign wealth funds or nation states, like, they're going to do their research. And a lot of these alts don't even publish a white paper anymore, right? Like like this space used to be, every coin that came out, there was a published white paper on it and a thesis, and you could tell what the reasoning behind it was. And you can go back and read some of this stuff. And now it kind of seems like the altcoin space has mirrored the fiat space, in my opinion, with regards to like decay and, falling apart over time, right? Like we talk about in the fiat space, since we went off the gold standard, everything's deteriorated, to the point in Safeteen's book where he says now it's Miley Cyrus twerking on stage, and it used to be Mozart, right? And it seems like that's what's happening in the altcoin community. Like, it used to be these coins with actual use cases, and a few of them are still around, obviously, right? XRP and ETH, and when I first started getting into it, like, Litecoin was a big thing. That one's almost gone at this point. They all had white papers and they all had thesis surrounding them, and now there's Trump and Melania coin, which I think symbolizes,
and Haktua.
Yeah, you can't forget about Haktua coin, but that to me really is kind of what shines a light on what's going on in that space. And that's why I don't think it's coming back around. I don't think you're going to see smart market moving capital be able to keep up with the capital that's flowing into Bitcoin, and then you combine that with the fact that there's, whatever, 1 million altcoins now, and there used to be 10,000, a cycle ago. I just don't.
I think there's 10 million now.
Yeah.
I think there's 10 million altcoins.
It doesn't surprise me, and the number will probably be higher. I'll release this tomorrow, and there'll be a couple hundred new ones probably. You know what I mean?
It takes 5 minutes to do it anymore, right?
Yep.
So there's no effort behind it.
Exactly. So I just think that combination is kind of what's going to lead to, Bitcoin's dominance growing even further over the next few months. I'm curious if you've kind of thought through that as well.
Yeah, well, about I don't know, maybe a year ago now. I think it might have been maybe a year. A big friend of mine is a big XRP guy, and he's now a Bitcoiner. And he said, well, I'm just waiting for alt season. And I said, do you see what's happening? There probably won't be an alt season. And if there is, it's going to be like the last ditch effort for that to happen. So the SBR, I think the most important thing about the SBR that just happened was the separation of Bitcoin and crypto. Like, that was the biggest thing, saying, hey, we're going to keep them both, but we're going to add to one pile and not the other. And that was a statement to the world. Now, there's certainly a lot of money to be made in altcoins. I don't touch them. I used to have the big three, and I sold them all off and consolidated. I probably honestly still have a couple of altcoins somewhere in a wallet somewhere, a little bit somewhere. But I think what we're watching right now is this replica market that just continues to grow. And people continually say it's the next Bitcoin, or I'm going to make, there could be a better Bitcoin in the future. But the reality of the situation is only people who don't understand Bitcoin would say that. So you brought up some good topics like XRP. XRP is a consulting and software company that has a side project called the XRPL. They make private ledgers, which banks will use. I think Ripple has a bright future. XRP, I mean, the CTO was saying, yeah, we don't owe you anything. We're going to do what's in our best interest, not in yours as an XRP holder. So I'm not making that up. I think the company is probably, I mean, they're deep seated in the Council on Foreign Relations, World Economic Forum. They have all the contacts in their board of directors. So they'll probably have a future with Ripple. I don't know what'll happen with XRP. I don't think that future is that bright. Certainly I don't see a $10,000 XRP. As a ridiculous claim. But if you look at like Solana, it has uses, right? These are great. Both of those two ledgers are really good for fast payments. They're just not as secure and definitely not as decentralized. That's a fact of physics in building a blockchain. And then you look at Litecoin. Like Litecoin actually is a good project. Like I think Litecoin calling itself digital silver was a brilliant idea for marketing. But the fact of the matter is hash rate matters. Hash rate matters. We just broke 900 exahash this morning. That is something like almost 1,000x the computing power of the big five tech firms. That's done by plebs and industrial houses all throughout the world, completely decentralized. Litecoin by itself is like 4.5 petahash.
Yep.
Like you could for $25 million, you could build a mine with a good energy contract and completely dominate Litecoin. So there's no comparison there. You can look at Caspa. They're now at 1.2 exahash. Like that's an interesting project. But the problem is that they have a founder who's deathly tied to Israel and offends people, so they don't want to use it. So, having the Satoshi mystery, I think, is fascinating because it like literally bothers people. People need an idol to worship. Like you have one, he's called Jesus Christ. That's the idol you worship. And, people need this idol. So they need a CEO. They prey upon those people who can't possibly stomach that physics and mathematics could run a financial system. You need a hero. But yeah, on the alt side of things, the problem is like you can look at like XRP is a great example. Their most recent pump was like super low volume. Like it started as clearly wash trading in South Korea. that's not you can go on AI. And say, I can't prove that, of course. But it's pretty obvious. And when you have a market where you control half of the coins and you can put as many in the market as you want and control the holders, you don't need to put much money into those markets for the price to go up significantly. So it just reminds me very much of the penny stock environment. A lot of false claims, a lot of hype, very low volume. So any volume in the security would pump it up pretty quickly.
Yep.
And then you start rug pulling slowly, like you do programmatic releases. So no one really notices the constant, multi-year rug pull. And, there's just too many flaws, too many cracks in the vase for me to put serious money behind any of that stuff. But I think that altcoins right now are going through a transition to where they should be. I've said this for at least 2 years now. If altcoins took their innovations, which there are, Trey, there are really good innovations there, payments and tokenization and all this stuff, it's all going to be used. Will they use those platforms? I don't know. I think a lot of these guys are going to end up becoming consultants, and that's great. I've known banks are tokenizing assets for 15 years. They've been working on crypto for 15 years inside of banks. So I don't know why a bank would say, let me use this private corporation with all this baggage of a token and rug pulls and all this other stuff. But I may be wrong, and I'm more than happy to admit that.
Well, real quick, I don't want to cut you off, but I think that's a super interesting kind of thread to pull on, because that's what I see with the altcoin market is, you are saying they are super fast for payments and they can do all these, they can process a ton of transactions, but you're just essentially changing who's processing the transactions at that point. You know what I mean? And so like, to me, it's like, okay, if you want to talk about XRP or you want to talk about Solana, they're competing with Visa and MasterCard and, all of these payment processes. And Lightning. And Lightning at this point too. But what's that use case worth, And I think that's a really good point of putting that into the correct bucket. How do you value that use case? Because if you're looking at, what is it? Visa's $700 million a year, in payments processed or something along those lines. And that, to me, if I was looking at something from that point of view of somebody processing my payments, do I want the Ripple company processing it? or do I just want to have it processed with Visa or MasterCard because they've been doing it and they're within the financial system? You know what I mean? And to me, if it's going to be centralized, I would rather go with the companies that have been around. You know what I mean? As opposed to a token that comes out of nowhere. So I do agree with you in that sense. But true, like blockchain proof of work mining is incredibly efficient, or incredibly inefficient rather, for most things. It just happens that for money and decentralization, it's worth those inefficiencies of 10 minutes for a block to go through because you want the decentralization there. You know, so that's where I struggle with the use cases of these alts, and I'm sure there are technological breakthroughs. But again, with technology and something, if that's your main focus, there's always going to be somebody that improves upon that and makes it better. You know, and with Bitcoin, it's done in layer 2s and obviously more layers, but the fundamental backbones are always there. You know,
well, I mean, Lightning is a great example, right? So Lightning just came out with stats. I use Lightning, so since January, I've spent Bitcoin in stores and restaurants at least a dozen times because I'll go to those places intentionally because I want to see it work. And you're talking a millisecond, maybe 2 seconds after you hit send, and it's like a penny or two. You know, Lightning is more decentralized than almost every other layer 1, which is fascinating by itself. But when you're talking about you have to understand everything in human nature, especially in America, comes down to a narrative. So the narrative that most people are sold is that technology is supposed to make things faster and cheaper. Like that's really what the technology narrative has always been. You know, if you wanted to invent like a drill, you want to screw something in by hand for 5 minutes or push a button and it's done in a millisecond. So that narrative tugs at the American heartstrings, right? Like faster and cheaper is what we need.
Yeah.
So when I started evaluating these things and breaking them down, aside from the fact that there's founders, VCs, board of directors, and they all come from the Obama administration or Council on Foreign Relations or these World Economic Forum, these places you should never trust with your money ever. I started hearing, you know, Bitcoin's too slow. Okay. Well, do we in the world that we live in, is the problem that we can't make enough payments fast enough for a cheap enough cost, or that we don't have sound money? Like that's really the measuring stick. So when I started getting into this and the altcoiners are like, oh, I can't believe you use that. And I'm like, I use Lightning, man. It is really fast. Really, I don't like paying in Bitcoin because I can pay in dollars. It doesn't hurt as much.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but I will if somebody's going to take Bitcoin. You know, now you're getting markups at Bitcoin places where they're charging 4 or 5% for fiat and giving you par pricing for Bitcoin. That's huge. But when you look at the space by itself, I'm like, okay, so let's look at America. I can already take my credit card and tap a screen and make a payment in 2 seconds. I can already do that. That's not an innovation. The problem is the money I'm spending on that credit card isn't mine. It comes with interest, and then I have to pay it back with fake money with interest. That's actually the problem, not the payment method. It's what you're paying with. So when you look at those things, there's nothing like Bitcoin. It has never existed. And the best part about Bitcoin is there will never be another Bitcoin. It will never happen. If you were to launch a proof of work like Caspa, it's astounding to me that Caspa has gotten where they've gotten, which tells me that they have tremendous political connections. Like that's the reality, because they want to recreate Bitcoin and proof of work, and it's a fair launch and all this other stuff. But you can look at the backgrounds of the founders and you can find out that they probably know this guy and that guy who protects the network. But if you were to launch Bitcoin right now, your hash rate would be 0. So all I would have to do is get 2 S21s, plug them into your network, and I would completely dominate your network for the next 15 to 20 minutes and completely fork it and change the system. I can't do that against 900 exahash. It's going to cost me $50-60 billion to do that for a 10-minute alteration. Like that's why the hash rate got me. Just understanding the impenetrable fortress of Bitcoin, which it absolutely is. That part to me kind of dictates that fundamental question. Do we need sound money or do we need fast money? And then I read, I don't know if you've read this book, but it's called The Great Taking by David Webb.
No, I haven't read it.
It's free for your listeners. Go to The Great Taking, I think it's .org, or you can go on YouTube and watch The Great Taking. He did a video synopsis. David Webb was a hedge fund manager, $900 million manager, left the world, moved to Europe, bought a farm, you know, kind of went, he knew the guys who were doing what the New World Order, what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And in the book, he describes something that just, it's like anyone buying into these altcoin systems has never read this guy's book, because he literally said, eventually they're going to go to blockchain, use stable coins as dollars, tokenize every real world asset, and then use fast and efficient and cheap cross-border payments to steal everything that you have. And if you had control of those, which is why I just don't see banks using any of these open source public networks for payments. That would be the worst banking idea in the history of the world. No matter who forced it, they'd never do it.
Yep.
But I do see them using, private blockchains, and there are companies who build those for banks. Ripple's one of them. And I see that being a big business for them. I just don't see the open source, XRPL or Solana or any of these Ethereum, Solana, and anything with meme coins is just a digital circus of rug pulls. There's really nothing else to it.
Yep.
And we don't need faster payment systems. Again, go to a gas station, pay for your gas. You tap a card, it takes the money, you're good. We don't need more efficient payment systems. That's not that big of a business, and it's already monopolized. We need sound money. And we need layer 2. So I said this from the very beginning when I became a Bitcoiner. I said, if altcoiners weren't greedy, we'd already be free.
Yeah.
We'd already be free, because they wouldn't have wanted to create this, BS currency on top of this illusory blockchain that looks like Bitcoin to an idiot who hasn't studied it.
Yep.
Not an idiot. That's a mean thing to say. To someone who's ignorant, who hasn't studied it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Ignorant is exactly.
I was an idiot.
Yeah. So
I call myself retarded 5 times a day.
Yeah,
I was retarded.
Yeah.
So, when you look at it from afar, you're like, oh, it's the same thing, right? But it's absolutely not, because there's no need for the currency. The blockchain is the innovation, which is why it went from, it's not Bitcoin, it's blockchain. That's actually a true statement. Blockchain is an innovation in banking. Will it be your blockchain with all this baggage behind it and baggage on founders? Banks aren't going to want to use that.
No, the banks will take the tech and use it for themselves, but they're not going to do it on the rails of these other companies and willingly give up control. The reason they don't have control of Bitcoin is because they can't, right? With these other ones, they're
you'll see.
Yeah.
I think in the next 18 months, you will see Solana or Ripple or one of these other companies be acquired by banks. I can totally see that.
Yeah.
And if they were good, honest people, what they would do is convert all of their token owners into shareholders and let them participate. But that's not how they operate. If they were actually interested in true financial freedom, all the altcoins would have started building layer 2 in 2011, but they didn't. Hoskinson's from Cardano, he said on stage, somebody asked me what I do for a living. I said, I print money. All the other altcoins are just they're a dressed up pig. That's the exact same central bank model where a foundation makes you decentralized. But who owns the foundation? Like, human nature is not hard to conquer.
Yeah.
It's been proven for at least the last 10 years of human existence have proven that if you have a lot of money, you can get any monkey to dance as long as you play the music. So if I have a foundation that makes the rules, or a limited amount of validators, or I make it too expensive for people to actually participate, there's no intention of decentralization, and that's fine. I actually don't have a problem with it like other people do. I just want them to call themselves what they are, and I would actually support them. Stop trying to say you're decentralized.
Yeah.
They are decentralized from our current system. Like, let's be honest about that as Bitcoiners as well. They are more decentralized than a central bank, but not much.
Yeah, I guess some of them are. I would say the same thing with the foundation. What is it? A board member, depending on the currency, it's 5 or 7 board members that vote on, what to do, and that is very, very similar to, what
central banking.
Yeah, exactly. What I imagine goes behind closed doors with central banking. I think as far as the altcoin discussion goes, we pretty much put a pin in it. I don't see, I don't see that, really scaling with everything we have going on. So have you paid any attention to, obviously we had the short-term price action, but how familiar are you with like the CME gap and Bitcoin falling back to those levels? Like, would you be able to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, the CME gap is a trader's opinion. So, they're the ones who are analyzing. So I'm not necessarily, I was a trader, but I was CBOT and then I was SEC. The CME gap is pretty much where traders are setting the options at. So filling that gap happens all the time. Like I think Bitcoiners fall into this illusion that now that we're $2 trillion, we're not manipulated. Even the stock market at, what is it, 150 trillion or whatever it is, that's manipulated every day. So I don't really, the CME gap seems to hit regularly until it doesn't. And in smaller markets, which 2 trillion is still a relatively small financial market, globally speaking, the gap is always just a measurement of where it'll go on the downside. So it has to touch that so that things clear. It's actually I'm not the best guy to discuss CME because I just look at it as a target that other guys analyze. To be honest with you, but it seems to be something that we hit regularly, which people think is mathematical. I actually think that is a controlled environment. Nothing is that accurate.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've researched on it, it's just, it tends to be more pronounced in the Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin market, because obviously it's Bitcoin trading 24/7, and that gap typically appears Friday, right before before the stock market shuts off, and then at least recently it seems like it's needed to kind of come back down to those levels and be filled. What do you make of the short-term price action that we're seeing right now? In my opinion, the best tracker of where the Bitcoin price is, because Bitcoin is the only true free market left on planet Earth. I think all this has to do with global liquidity, and that's pretty much what I've been kind of using to track where we're going as far as this bull market. I would say global liquidity and hash rate, which we already touched on.
Yeah, I mean, global liquidity certainly has a big play in this, right? When you have tariffs, trade wars, gold shifting from coast to coast, from continent to continent. I raise capital. I can tell you pockets have been very tight for 2 months. No one's investing in anything. They want to see what happens next. That's a big part of it. Human emotion dictates markets and free markets. And I will disagree with you that I don't think Bitcoin is the last free market. I don't think that there is currently a free market. I personally know market makers in the stock market and penny stocks. I've worked with them with my own stock, and if they have directives, they fill them. So these guys are going out and borrowing massive amounts of money, buying Bitcoin and flushing the market. So the CME could be mathematical, could totally be mathematical. I could be wrong here, but in general, it kind of looks like projection. So it's become very predictable in the Bitcoin space to kind of see the weekend flush, the Sunday pump. These things are happening regularly. I don't like that the world is getting excited about stocks trading 24/7. As a former stock trader, I enjoyed 3 o'clock and going home and not having to worry about it in the morning, because you're going to watch a lot of people manipulate the markets while everyone's sleeping. That's absolutely going to happen. The short-term price action, I think right now that we're watching, there's of course, buy the rumor, sell the news. The news wasn't as spectacular as people. I don't know whoever. I'm actually, the biggest thing I love about the SBR is they're not going to cost the taxpayer. That was kind of my prereq. As a Bitcoiner, I don't want to print money for more Bitcoin. I think that's stupid.
Yep.
Let's sell some buildings, sell some land, cut some expenses. I love what they did with a budget efficiency. But I think the short-term price action for Bitcoin has a lot to do. I think you downplay a little bit how many retail people are getting into Bitcoin. I was on a plane going to Palm Beach. I was on Real America's Voice. I was flying down there. And on the way there, a lady saw me looking on my phone at graphs, and I told her what I do. And everyone in the aisle, on both sides of the aisle, was listening to this conversation. All 4 of them went on River and bought $1,000 to $10,000 worth of Bitcoin on the plane. Now, I would bet that of those 5 people that purchased Bitcoin because of that conversation, I would bet dollars to donuts all 5 of them sold.
Yep.
So there are a lot more. I just talked to a 75-year-old guy today, and I spent a half an hour on the phone with him explaining Bitcoin and showing him River and all these things. I think there's a lot of new money coming in small doses. I actually don't think the big money has come in yet. I think Saylor is the big player in the space, which kind of scares me, to be honest. I love what he's doing. I think it's genius what he's doing with 0% and convertible. There's really no risk to strike, which all the altcoiners like, he's going to, there's no risk. He's taken no risk.
Yep.
I mean, there's a little risk. There's always risk. But I think that we're watching still at this point in time, a majority of the market being retail, but retail has escalated. So it went from unaccredited investors to accredited investors, now to qualified investors, and then it'll go to institutions. And then you'll see the market play out the way it should. So at about 7 or 8 trillion, this market becomes manageable. I think at about 10 trillion, it becomes predictable. But until then, it's still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. And a lot of the new money coming in is, I have plenty of friends that are in their 40s, never bought Bitcoin, and they came in swinging at 100,000 at 60. Almost everyone I know, my close friends here, I just had dinner with these guys an hour and a half ago. Everyone in there bought me dinner because I pushed them all in for 6 figures at 30,000. I was like, what are you doing? Like, you got 200 grand in the bank, put 100 in Bitcoin, let it sit for a year and see what happens at 30. So they're very happy there. Even people who came in at 100, I'm talking them off the cliff. When you go over 100, money flooded in. That's why it went from 100 to 109. That's a 9% increase in the market cap. That's not institutional. That's market makers driving the price up, creating a mini rug pull to get lettuce hands out. That's pretty obvious. But I think institutionally, I think the biggest thing that we've seen recently, it happened today, was Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund investing $2 billion into Binance. Why Binance? Because they're the largest holder of Bitcoin. So you're watching these like Saylor is a roundabout way. He made buying Bitcoin for corporate guys easy. Unchained Capital makes it very easy. That's why I used a multi-sig.
Yep.
They make it very easy for untechnical people. So as we get, I think the technical, like the savages, like the self-storage guys, like the self-custody guys like me with multi-sig, we're kind of a dying breed. I think most people they love IBIT and they love the ETFs because they don't have to do anything. We have to understand that. We have to understand that that's okay. Like that's totally fine. If you understand self-custody, you're going to be happier than they are. You're going to do better than they are. And that's cool. We're not going to save them. That's what they want to do. They're helping the network grow. They're providing financing. And we want them to be, we want them to hodl for years. So yeah, I kind of disagree on the fact that there's it's institutions yet. I think that we haven't seen that. Even money coming from BlackRock isn't BlackRock. That's investor capital that they're allocating on their behalf.
Yeah.
When you start seeing the states, which I hope go to an SBR first, because if 50 states own Bitcoin, that's a hell of a lot more decentralized ownership than the federal government.
Yep.
So I think I always hear we're early. I think we're a year and a half away from a global payment system. It's not going to be, nobody's going to use Bitcoin to buy anything in the United States. You don't have to. The dollar is still the most valuable currency. You're going to see Africa, South America, India, Asia. When Lightning hits and it has a better user interface where it's simple to use, you are going to see Bitcoin Africa already. We talked to a guy from, it was in Nigeria, and he said in his town, every transaction he makes is in Bitcoin. They all use Lightning.
Well, that's
in America.
That's the fascinating part about it for me. I know when Strike originally started, that was kind of their thesis was bringing Bitcoin to, to the places and regions where they can't have banks, right? And now if you're sending remittances home, you can send it and you don't have to worry about getting mugged outside of a Western Union or your family getting mugged outside of a Western Union. So I think that that use case is fascinating. So to kind of rewind a little bit, you think that there's still, it seems like you're pretty certain there's still market makers that are manipulating the price, at least to some degree. And I mean, it seems I'm
absolutely certain of that. Yeah, 100%.
Got it. What makes you nervous about what Saylor's doing? Is it from a lack of like a centralization of the coins, or what's?
I'm not concerned. That's the beautiful part of proof of work. Like you could own 98% of all the Bitcoin on planet Earth and still not control the network.
Yeah, of course. So what is the concern with Saylor's strategy from your point of view?
I don't have a concern with it on ownership. I think it's bad for optics. So it just kind of gives, the altcoiners the ammunition they're looking for. This guy controls the market, even though he's using TWAPs and he's not really affecting the price. He's buying OTC. I love the corporate treasury idea. That was when I first got into Bitcoin. I said, I don't know why every company in the world isn't doing what Saylor's doing. But when you're snapping up that much Bitcoin, and plenty of conversations about them becoming a Bitcoin bank and GameStop becoming a Bitcoin bank, and I don't fully understand that. I asked questions about that in a space earlier today. Basically, it's just lending against other people's Bitcoin. That part of it, to me, nothing really what Saylor's doing scares me. I just think that we need other people with bigger voices because we're falling victim to now Saylor is Hoskinson or one of these other guys. Yeah. And people will confuse the two. They'll say, well, altcoins are okay because Saylor's the CEO of Bitcoin.
Yep.
And we also have idol worship and all that kind of stuff. I love Michael Saylor. I can't wait to meet him one day. I think he's genius. He's a little autistic, which I love. And I think what he's doing is actually beneficial to Bitcoin, but I think optically it's dangerous because it kind of gives credence to, people. There are people I have met who said, well, isn't Michael Saylor the CEO of Bitcoin? Yeah. I'm like, no, he's like you and me. He's just a buyer. He just has more money. But I love what Saylor's doing. So I don't have any fear of it. I think optically we need somebody else to step up. And we've seen that some of the Japanese companies, Metaplanet, they're huge. Starting to do like a cycle. But it's just ammunition for the whole tribalism of altcoins versus Bitcoins is actually ridiculous. To be honest with you, because you can prove 6 ways to Sunday that you're right, and they're just going to go in another chat and call you a liar. I mean, it's like watching children.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, it's okay. I don't have any beef with that. I think with what Saylor's doing right now is just confusing people. And I think that optically him buying this much Bitcoin, there's a certain perspective that someone says, well, I got to get mine before he gets it all. And then there's a certain perspective that says, well, he's just going to have it all anyway. So why would I buy any?
Yeah.
So it's just a little dangerous with concentration of narrative.
Yeah, exactly. I can get that point of view. I think that's also just part of being the first mover, right? Like if it wasn't Saylor, it was going to be somebody else who kind of cracked the code. And
people never give credit to the actual first mover in Bitcoin that brought attention to Bitcoin, which is actually Julian Assange.
Really?
He's actually the first. WikiLeaks was dead in the water. And he basically said, I need a way to take payments because he's publishing declassified or what are they called? FOIA documents, totally legal documents. And they cut off all of his payment systems in 2014. And he said, well, I'm going to take Bitcoin because it's the only money governments can't control. And that's when Satoshi bounced. He said, hey, he's bringing too much heat to this too early on. And he bounced.
I had no idea that was...
Saylor takes credit, but it was actually Julian Assange that brought real credibility to Bitcoin.
Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea.
The history of Bitcoin's fascinating, man.
Yeah,
it really is.
I didn't even go... I thought I was... almost through the rabbit hole, but I haven't gotten down to the Assange stuff yet. Cool, man. Dude, this has been awesome. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we really should cover here. Is there anything that's on your mind that maybe we missed from the last week?
I think it's fascinating that Rumble bought 17.2 million. Basically a raunchy startup, right-wing conservative platform that actually allows free speech. Chris is an innovator in the space. I actually heard that they were going to be buying Bitcoin about a year in advance from another friend of mine, and they actually did it. I think one of the things people are overlooking is the Tether story. So when Tether was attached to Lightning for payments, a lot of Bitcoiners like, this is going to centralize. It doesn't matter. It's layer 2. It's never going to centralize layer 1. But at the same time, when that happened, and a week later, I got to meet some of the guys at Lightning Labs, and I asked him, I said, hey, why are you onboarding Tether? And he said, other payment processors use 142 currencies. We have 1. So if we want to be taken seriously and prove decentralization, we need to take on other currencies. But there's also this mysticism about Tether. Because altcoiners love to say Tether controls the Bitcoin market, and they're totally corrupt, despite the fact that Howard Lutnick, our commerce secretary, has said, I've audited them, they're good, and they're the 19th largest buyer of treasuries in the world, and they use U.S. debt interest to accumulate Bitcoin. I think that I hated Tether until I dug into Paulo and started realizing, like when they were banned in Europe for not following MiCA regulations, I talked to one of the advisors that wrote the MiCA regulations in Europe. And he said, no, he's like, America, you guys have this all wrong. MiCA regulations basically state that a stable coin to be approved in Europe has to have 60% of its assets in bank cash with no interest, like 1.5%.
Got it.
So Paulo basically said, how can I run a business like this? Why would I put 60% of the risk on failing banks? I'm just going to keep buying Bitcoin and do what I'm doing. He's actually more cypherpunk than most people in Bitcoin. And I think it's fascinating that he was speaking at this event recently, kind of talking about the fact that he wants to buy more U.S. treasuries. So Bitcoin has its own mysticism behind it. Who's Satoshi? Who's the for Satoshi? And these such dumb stories that are out there. Really, really stupid. People who need an idol, right? Like I need an idol to justify. I just need physics. I'm a physics guy. I need math. If the math makes sense, I'll do a deal. But when you look at Tether, I think that Tether actually becomes the largest stable coin in the world by far, and the largest pusher of US dollars into the global south, India, and Asia that America has ever had. So I think that's one fascinating thing. The Abu Dhabi, the Abu Dhabi sovereign fund investing in Binance, I think, is a fascinating thing. Well, but more importantly, you have to look at the overall market itself. Like, look at Twitter Spaces, right? So go to an altcoin Twitter space. There'll be 150 people on it, and they'll be talking about things that don't matter, justifying their own investment and bashing other ones. And then go to a Bitcoin space, and you'll find 600 to 1,000 people talking about macroeconomic issues, history, just this evolution of people there. And I think that even if an altcoiner watches this podcast, like, put 10% of your portfolio in Bitcoin just in case it takes off. Yep. Stop hating it. Put a little bit in it. If you want to play with the altcoins and make money, there's a ton of money to be made in that, I'm sure. But I think I think we're watching an evolution of a government saying digital assets are Bitcoin, stable coins, tokenized real world assets. I have still not heard the government say altcoins are digital assets yet. Because I think that from the Ripple case is fascinating. I do understand how they partially won their case. Like, this is a new mechanism that from 1933. I don't think that they should be called, they either should or shouldn't be a security, not halfway in, halfway out. That's the most ridiculous ruling. And it's also dangerous to retail. So, basically saying banks deserve more disclosure than retail for an investment. That's dangerous precedent. But I think what we'll see is all that slate wiped clean, new regulation coming in, and I think that they will either be called either a centralized currency or a digital security. And that I may be completely off, but I think once there's clarity in this space, that number one, you have to look at the Bitcoin blockchain can't run the world. It's just not built for that. It is a money producing machine, and layer 2 is highly scalable, exceptionally fast and beautiful. But right now there's so much noise on these layer 1s that act like a layer 2. Yep. There's so much noise on them. Eventually we are going to see interconnected blockchains, but at the nuclear reactor is going to be Bitcoin right in the center of it. And then we'll see what happens from there. But I think this past week has been pretty slow actually for Bitcoin, and the price is down, so everyone's whining and complaining.
Well, I try to make it a point to not talk price on the show, because every other
it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's I think there's more macro components that deserve discussion a lot of the times. Other than
Bitcoin bonds. How do we miss bonds?
Bitcoin bonds. So again, I'm explain this to me like I'm a fifth grader, but essentially they can combine Bitcoin with U.S. Treasury notes on these bonds, correct?
Sort of. So think of it this way. So say you're a sovereign nation and you're going to buy $100 million in U.S. bonds. 90% of that money would go to the government. 10% would go into Bitcoin. This isn't a new model. So I've spoken with two banks. One of them is the largest bank in their state. They have come to us and said, hey, we want to invest in mining. So banks are actually reaching out to us to invest in mining, which is fascinating. And they've both said that in late 2025, that a lot of their real estate loans will have the same componentry. So you have a $500,000 house. They're going to lend you $550,000. 10% has to go into Bitcoin, and that's the collateral you'll get for paying off the loan. That's actually genius structure. So one of the things that bugs me about the word like utility tokens, like, your utility tokens are just a faster, cheaper way of moving fiat. That's really what utility is. That's it. Real world utility is only found in Bitcoin. We would not be able to pull off the age of AI if it weren't for the innovations of Bitcoin miners using garbage dumps to power generators to mine Bitcoin, using electrical facilities in foreign nations that bring grids to third world countries, nuclear powerhouses using nuclear energy to mine Bitcoin. The energy innovation that Bitcoin has created. I live in Texas. When I moved here in 2020, the first month I was here, there was a snowstorm and our power didn't work for 2 weeks. It was on and off for 2 weeks. 6 weeks later, they passed a Bitcoin mining bill. We became the Bitcoin mining capital of the world, and we have never had a grid problem. So that is real world utility. It's
incredible. It is
balancing grids. Like, that's utility. Now, what's the next utility before payments? Collateral. What's a better utility for digital assets than collateral for real world money, real world financing? So the utility of Bitcoin is just misunderstood at this point in time. I can give you like the mine we're building in Tennessee. We're actually at 0 kilowatts per cents per kilowatt hour because we're actually extracting CO2 from ethane, using the ethane to power the mine and selling the CO2 to a distributor. So we are now, at the same time, we are saving flare gas, which is usually burned off into the atmosphere. We're saving the fractionation plant at the end of this pipeline money on shipping through a train, which is really the only way you can move ethane. It's too volatile. We're buying it for cents on the dollar. We're extracting the CO2 in the fractionation plant, selling it to a company that'll make beverages. They'll use it for greenhouses, all these good uses. And then we're taking this waste energy that the world would have put into the atmosphere, and we're using it to generate 8.3 megawatts off grid to mine Bitcoin. That type of innovation is actually more needed than any payment model you'll ever find. Our grids in America are on average 70 years old. Some are over 100 years old. And we are buying so much energy that it's necessary to have someone to pre-purchase it and sell it back for that balance. And in Texas, I can tell you, we haven't had a power outage in 3 years since we became the Bitcoin mining capital of the world. That's utility.
You got me all fired up over here, man. That's incredible.
And I'd advise everyone, get a solo Satoshi. I don't have any deal with them. I've talked to the team on the phone. They're great guys. It's like a 3-man team, like doing everything that they can. But those bid axes are huge.
Yeah, I ordered it, I think it was Sunday last week. I had it by like Wednesday. Like it was, they were moving, man. I don't want to keep you here too much longer. I think the stable coin point that we kind of went into was super, super important. I think that it's one of those things that the U.S. government doesn't love, but at the same time, like you said, they're buying up so many treasury bonds that they can't do anything to stop it. And
they love it. The U.S. government loves stable coins because they don't have to worry about China not buying debt. More importantly, this is something people overlook. Trey, tell me the difference from a technological standpoint. The difference between, and there is a difference. The only difference between, give me the difference between a stable coin and a CBDC.
I mean, I would say that who's controlling the coin is the only difference, right?
Well, who controls the coin in a stable coin? Who really controls it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fair. So what's the
same thing.
Yeah, what's the difference then?
The only difference is that a CBDC has no backing, right? So it's truly digital fiat.
Yep.
Whereas a stable coin actually has real world assets through treasuries, gold, Bitcoin, other things that back it. A CBDC is just another fiat system, and that's coming in October in Europe.
Yeah.
Like they've already announced a digital euro. That will be a pure fiat play, where at least stable coins can be backed by real world assets. They don't really need to be.
No, but Tether's over collateralized. I believe the last time I heard Paolo speak about it, he's, between all of the assets on their balance sheet, they're at 120%, as far as like losing the term here, but.
I've slowly become I actually think Paolo is maybe the sharpest guy in the industry, to be honest. He's a true Bitcoiner, which was totally crazy. A year and a half ago, I've been like, Tether scumbags, because I know one of the guys who started it, who absolutely is a scumbag. And now that he's not involved, I'll pay attention to him. But if you look at like what he's talking, it wouldn't shock me because they've accumulated so much Bitcoin that being 120 over collateralized wouldn't shock me. And they have cash. Like think of what they just did. They just bought basically controlling interest in a Brazilian energy company so they can mine. Like these are the guys who build an ecosystem that is, he has proven time and time again that he is defiant of tyrants.
Yep.
And that's what we're looking for. So, the difference between a CBDC and a stable coin is one is more dangerous than the other. We just don't know which one it is. Like we have no idea. So do you go with a corporatocracy managing your money or a government? Both have proven throughout 500 years of documented history to be detrimental to freedom. So Bitcoin is that last bastion of decentralized, uncontrollable money. Stable coins are the gateway drug.
Yeah.
So once people have stable coins, they're going to have them on an exchange. They're going to have them in a wallet with some sort of exchange function. And eventually they're going to go, maybe I'll put like $50 in Bitcoin and see what happens. Or maybe I'll throw like $100 in Solana. They're a gateway drug. And the more, and I always tell people, listen, I'm a Bitcoiner and it's what I've done. Go out and buy like 50 altcoins and tell me how it goes. right? Like I was the father who said, "Hey, my kid's about to touch the fireplace," and my wife's like, "No." I'm like, "Shh,
Yeah.
let him touch the fireplace. He'll never touch it again."
Yep.
And we're getting to that environment. So I think even hearing Trump in Nashville last year, he was pretty clear. He's like, stable coins are going to be a big thing, and that's going to lead to bigger things for Bitcoin. And I think he's totally right.
Yeah. 100%, man. Eric, this was incredible. I'm pumped. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
Where can people find you? Obviously on X, but if you wanna plug the the X handle, the Twitter handle, anything to do with your your business you run as well. This was awesome, man. So thank you so much. But go ahead and tell people where to find you.
Yeah, you can find me on X at EA_Rice. Everyone confused me with EA Sports. It's just my first two initials, EA_Rice. I'm on Telegram. My handle there is Critical Rice Theory, which is one of my favorite names ever. And you can find me on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio under the Rice Report. And I do 1 or 2 lives per week and 1 or 2 interviews. I cover everything. So I do money, politics, and religion on that podcast. It's not just Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin, but it's a very small part of what's happening in the world. So I talk to, guys who've uncovered child trafficking rings, government corruption, religious topics, Zionism, all these. I cover just about everything, but every live episode I go through the financial markets, the political landscape, and then, I just find it my life changed when I found Jesus, and I try to share that at the end of every episode as well.
I love it, man. That's a great spot to end it here. Thank you guys for tuning in. And Eric, we'll have to do this again soon.
Absolutely. God bless you, Trey.